This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And I'm Sam Abu Al-Samid.
So, Sam, you've been getting around lately.
Yeah, I walked about 26 miles over the course of 3 days in Las Vegas, my least favorite place in the entire world.
You have not been to Atlantic City lately, have you?
No, and hopefully I never will.
I hated Atlantic City. So anyway.
Probably for many of the same reasons I hate Las Vegas.
Pretty much. Vegas is actually probably better, but we're not going to go devolve into that right now. But you also have made some appearances. I heard you on NPR on my morning commute.
Yeah, I was chatting with Tracy Samilton from Michigan Radio about Ford's big C-Vita X announcement on Monday. Yep.
And also you appeared on Twit.
I did. Actually, it was on the Tech Guy show. So that's Leo Laporte's radio show that he does every weekend on Saturdays and Sundays. It's syndicated on, I think, about 200 stations across the country, actually Canada or U.S. and Canada. It's a 3-hour show, and he has some segments with various people who have some expertise in various areas like home theater and photography and travel technology, and Leo invited me to join him on there to talk about auto tech. So I'll be doing that every Sunday at 11:30 a.m. Pacific, roughly. And then the show's also available as a podcast as well, so you can download it later.
All right. Well, we should try to post a link in the show notes to where people could try to find that if they're interested in getting more Sam.
Yeah. Yeah, about another 10 minutes a week or so, which is probably about all most people can handle of me.
Don't sell yourself short. But anyway,
I don't know. I think maybe we oversell ourselves sometimes, but
we're supposed to do that.
Yeah.
I come by it honestly. It's just my job. This week, we've got competitors, actually, in the various, the two different driveways or garages or fleets or whatever you want to call it. But you're driving the BMW X1 and I'm driving the Volvo XC40. So why don't you go first?
Okay, so just before I headed off to Las Vegas to spend some time in the desert, I spent some time driving the BMW X1 X-Drive 28i, which is not among the shorter names that BMW has in its lineup, relatively speaking. But yeah, so this is BMW's smallest sport activity vehicle, as they like to call it, or a crossover, as most of the rest of the world calls it. It shares its platform. It's the same front-wheel drive platform that's used for the X2, as well as for the Mini Clubman. No, not the Clubman. Or maybe it is the Clubman, but also the Countryman.
Clubman. I get confused.
It's also used for the Countryman. I don't know if the Clubman is on the same platform or a smaller one.
I think it's both. Anyway, it's a front-wheel drive BMW.
Yeah, it's this one was all-wheel drive, so you can get it as front-wheel drive. So it's transverse engine, front drive or all-wheel drive. The one I drove was all-wheel drive. For the U.S. market, at least, it's only available with a 2-liter turbo 4-cylinder, which is the same engine that's offered in the Mini Countryman. And it puts out 228 horsepower, 258 foot-pounds of torque. And it's quite a nice engine. I've driven variations of this engine in a number of different BMW and Mini vehicles now, and quite like it. It's got kind of a snarly exhaust sound, surprisingly so. And for a small premium crossover, it's quite nice. It's got decent number of features in there. It's got BMW's usual iDrive, a relatively small screen on top of the dash, in the current fashion. I think it's a 6-inch display, if I'm not mistaken. It has support for Apple CarPlay if you decide to pay BMW's subscription fee, but BMW does not do Android Auto, unfortunately. The vehicle itself is, it's definitely a compact, perhaps even a subcompact. So when you get in, it does feel fairly snug. It doesn't feel like a big, massive SUV at all. in most respects, it does feel more premium than a typical Mini variant of the same platform would. But it doesn't really feel any bigger. And in some respects, it almost felt a little tighter than the last Countryman I drove. So, it doesn't have a huge amount of shoulder room. It's fairly snug in the shoulders. The door openings are comparatively small, so you do have to watch your head when you get in and out. And the back seat will accommodate, a couple of adults. But you don't have a huge amount of space back there. Putting the driver's seat where I normally have it, I was able to sit behind myself, with my knees just barely clearing the plastic panel on the back of the seat. So, it's usable for 4 adults, although I probably wouldn't want to take a long road trip with it. But going around town, it's fine. And certainly, with a young family with a couple of small kids, they'll be fine with it. There's a decent amount of cargo space in the back. And it's reasonably quick. This thing, despite its fairly compact dimensions, is actually fairly heavy. It's just shy of 3,700 pounds.
Whoa.
Yeah, so it's
that's a lot. It's
kind of chunky. But it's got so much torque that you don't really feel it all that much. It's got plenty of get up and go, and it's like I said, it sounds pretty good. In general, it drives pretty well. It's got for what is nominally a front wheel drive vehicle, it's got decent steering feel to it. Better than some of the recent rear wheel drive BMWs, I think. And it's a decently fun car to drive, although it's not inexpensive. The front wheel drive one starts at about 35 grand. All wheel drive adds a couple thousand to that. And as equipped, the one I drove was about $43,000. So
that's not outrageous.
It's not outrageous, but it's not that much more than the Mini. And frankly, the interface, the user interface, the HMI inside the vehicle, I personally prefer this layout to what BMW has, or to what's in the Minis. It's fine. It's typical modern BMW.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the funkiness of a BMW or a Mini interface with all the toggle switches. And, I personally find the Mini interface to be somewhat more confusing than it needs to be, just more for the sake of style than functionality.
Yeah, it's definitely, the Mini stuff gets tiresome. I noticed the same thing when I tried the X2 a while back. I really liked the way it drove. I liked the interface, and I thought it was a really nice sort of premium compact crossover. I don't know how much daylight there is between the X1 and the X2. They seem to be pretty much the same thing. And I did think that the Mini on the same basic hardware was a much better deal, but you have to put up with the Mini stuff. And that may not be your thing. So if you want something that's a little bit more conservatively styled, a little bit more, I don't know, grown up in some ways, then you're going to have to go with the BMW. So, the X1 at 43 makes a much better case for itself than the X2 did at like 50 something, which is what it cost, the one that I drove. So,
yeah. And, the X2 is, because it's got the even numbering on it, means it's supposed to be more of the coupe-like variant of the X1, much as the 4 Series is to the 3 and the 6 to the 5 and so on. I think, anything above the mid 40s for a car like this, is probably too much, but in this price range, for a premium vehicle of this type, it's probably okay. This one, but at that price point, it didn't really have any, driver assist features. There's no adaptive cruise control, no lane keeping, none of that stuff. You're basically limited to like backup camera, and that's about it.
Really? So is it not available, or was it just not on?
It's available. It just wasn't on the one I was driving.
And so to get it, you've probably got to buy a package that's pricey.
Yeah, it's probably at least a couple of grand more than that.
Yeah. So, and that's the BMW thing. That's how they get you. But it becomes
they nickel and dime you to death.
Yeah, but it also becomes a little frustrating at that point because you're already paying premium money for this thing to have none of those features. Like that's where it gets annoying if you're actually spending your own borrowed money.
Yeah,
it's like, well, no, that should be standard because you can get a Jeep Compass with that stuff. That's roughly the same size for I don't know, low 20s. Granted, it's a Jeep Compass, not a BMW, but.
Yeah, but you know what? The new generation Compass is actually a pretty nice vehicle.
Yeah, well, it's as distinctive as the BMW, just in a different way.
Yeah. And, if you option up a Compass, with the Trailhawk package on there, you've actually got a pretty capable off-roader, which I don't think any variant of the X1 is ever really going to be a serious off-roader.
Not on purpose.
Yeah.
But I mean, otherwise though, how did you like it? What kind of fuel economy did you get? I guess is one of my questions.
Yeah, it was about 25.
That's not great. I mean,
no, it's not great,
heavy,
but it's okay. Yeah, it's heavy, and it's got a fair amount of power.
Yeah. So does it make an argument for itself among the increasingly crowded class of premium compact crossovers? It just kind of get lost.
No, I think it's pretty competitive. I mean, this is a smaller vehicle than say the XC40, which you're going to talk about in a minute. Well, maybe not. It feels smaller.
Well, and that was surprising to me. Is somebody was asking me about the XC40 compared to the RAV4, and I thought the RAV4 was a whole other class size larger. It's not. They're dead on interior volume wise. They're the exact same size. So you may not have it in front of you, but I'm curious what the interior volume of the X1 is as well, because the XC40 is about 98 cubic feet. And it seems like the X1 might be about the same size.
I think it's less than that.
Really?
Yeah. Let me let's go to fueleconomy.gov where they have such stats that are readily comparable.
They usually do. Yeah. And it's interesting just to see how that impression of the RAV4 being bigger, I don't know where
it certainly seems the RAV certainly seems bigger on the outside.
Yeah. Well, I used to be able to get a 3-row. Maybe that's what my impression's like, a holdover that it was. I can't imagine that they've shrunk it. That seems wrong to me.
They definitely have not done that. Let's see. Okay, so XC40 and 2019 Toyota.
I'm surprised that site's still up, given the shutdown.
Well, as long as it doesn't crash, it's fine. If anything crashes, then they won't be able to get it turned back on. But
we'll be using the Wayback Machine for it.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got X1, XC40, and RAV4 in front of me here. Okay. Surprisingly, the X1 is rated at 101 cubic feet passenger space and 27 cubic feet of cargo versus 98 for the XC40 and 25 cubic feet for the cargo. They don't have the specs listed here for the RAV. So if you want to go ahead and start talking, give us your impressions of the RAV40, I will look up the RAV specs.
Yeah, I found those on
Toyota website.
Yeah. So, the XC40, I was actually quite surprised by it because my experience with the larger Volvos has been a little bit varied. I certainly love what they've done to reinvigorate the brand from a style standpoint. It's definitely distinctive, and that carries down to the XC40, which is on a different set of hardware. It's on the compact modular architecture, which is for the smaller cars.
Right. Volvo's doing two architectures now. The SLP, is it SLP or SLA? I can't remember. It's SLP.
Okay.
Scalable. SPA. Scalable product architecture.
Right.
And that's what they use for the 60 and 90 series, and then this compact one for the XC40, and they're also sharing it with some Geely stuff and Lynk & Co.
Yeah, and it feels really solid from behind the wheel. And the thing that impressed me the most was that on this car, they have figured out how to make it ride and handle appropriately for the class. It probably doesn't have the composure at the limits that the BMW might, but for 8/10ths driving, it's fully competitive. It doesn't crash over stuff. And that was my complaint about the SPA cars, is that they just, they don't feel supple enough. I know it's a kind of a weird word to use, but they should soak up stuff a little bit more than they do. And this one has a good balance. But also, I really love the distinctiveness of the XC40, because I think that's, as the market kind of gets very crowded and as automakers consolidate, you've got two things going on, right? There's more crossovers than ever, but there's like, we're getting fewer car makers. So each thing that's going to survive has to really stand out. And the XC40 really does. It has its own really distinctive look. It catches your eye. And it's got enough kind of whimsy, like stuff that they can't get away with on, say, the XC90 or even the XC60, which they take themselves a little bit more seriously. Mm-hmm. The XC40 it's a little bit more entry level. It's not priced that way, but it's at that sort of like, it's the first. But
is anything really priced that way these days?
No. And and Volvos have always been expensive, but the XC40 is that first step into the brand, or it's that. It covers both of the roles. It's the smaller Volvo crossover, and it could be your entry point. And it does that really well, and it has a lot of nice touches. I love the interior design as well. There's, they pay attention to the details, and it doesn't matter how much it costs. That just, it pays
except
off.
For Sensus.
Yeah. We'll get to that. I love, just the shapes and the themes that they've used. There's, lovely metal trim and the oblong vents. That stuff looks like it could have been lifted from a 164 back in like 1969. It's lovely. And they've even, Sensus has been well integrated into the design and flow of the dashboard. That tablet screen is it has a prominent place. It's not way down on the console. It's up there like convention is now, but it also doesn't look quite as tacked on. It looks more integrated, which is right. Nice.
Did it feel more responsive to you than prior ones that you've tried? Okay, yes. So it wasn't just me.
No, it feels a lot more snappy.
Okay.
And I spent a good amount of time talking about the philosophy of these systems and the philosophy of how they should be reviewed with Volvo's PR guy a while ago. And, he made a lot of really good points. And so I wanted to give Sensus, which I've complained about in the past, a fair shake and get over myself with some of my aversion to the automatic controls and stuff. Because I think the people that buy the cars and equip them this way, they want that stuff. My Volvo's had it because I was buying used, and the used buyer, like, your opinion doesn't matter because you're not buying the car new. So they're making them for new buyers.
Well, your opinion still matters, even if you're buying it used.
I guess.
I mean, in terms, if there are configuration options, Sensus is standard across the line on all these Volvos now, so you don't have an option,
right?
But if there were different options, like lower trim levels that had a more basic system, or that didn't use a touch screen, even as a used car buyer, you have the option to look for one of those instead of the so-called premium one.
That's true.
So it doesn't matter if you're buying new or used. You still have, your opinion is still relevant. And if you don't like what's in there, you go to another brand.
That's true. So I guess as an automaker, I'm sure that they don't care as much about what that opinion does to the resale value unless it really craters it.
Well, actually they do. They care a lot about resale values. Yeah, because especially in the premium end of the market, a lot of the sales, and in fact, in many cases, the majority of the sales, as much as 2/3 of the quote unquote sales, are actually leases.
Oh, that's right.
A lot of premium buyers lease rather than buy. And so the resale value has a huge impact there on the cost to leasing customers, because it's the lease payment is directly related to what the residual value of the car is after it comes off lease. Then the manufacturer has to dispose of it somewhere. They have to sell it to somebody else or send it to auction, and so they calculate that lease based on, the MSRP minus the residual value, and then, over whatever the term of the lease is. And, if the residual value is low, then the lease payment is going to be higher, and it's going to be less affordable to a lot of customers.
That's true. And I think that's why, it's maybe a chicken and egg issue too. You see a lot of these cars like BMWs, Audis, Mercedes, and Volvo are leased because the lease deals are very good, and those deals are probably very good because they can get the residual value out of them.
Right.
That's interesting. I didn't think it. I clearly didn't think my commentary all the way through. But yes.
Welcome to Wheelbearings, folks.
This is a lovely compact premium crossover. I really, really like the way it drives. I think everybody has been pretty positive about it, and I can see why, because it's just a friendly Volvo-like vehicle. They got the character right, and I don't know that I could jump into an SPA Volvo. I don't know that I would be happy buying an XC90 or an XC60 or an S90, even as a longtime Volvo owner and enthusiast. Those cars.
What about the 60 series models?
I haven't tried one yet.
Okay,
but I'm assuming that they're also SPA based, so it'd be a lot.
They are, but they're a little more modestly sized.
Yeah. Again, they're beautiful and I love them, and they're nice places to spend time. I don't know from a driver point of view if it would satisfy me enough. And for me, when I'm buying, that's my real determination is, am I going to hate this every time I drive it and realize that I'm paying to hate it? So the XC40 is not like that. It is a Volvo that could bring me back to Volvo. It's just, it is light on its feet enough. It has all of the features. When I wind up spending my money on cars, I become a feature buyer. So it has the automatic climate control and all of the what do they call it now? IntelliAssist? The pilot assist stuff.
Pilot assist.
Which I was using.
ADAS stuff.
Yeah, all the ADAS stuff.
Advanced driver assist.
And I was using that last night. I said, you know what? I'm going to be the typical non-type A driver of this car. So I set the climate control on auto. I was like, you do your thing, make it 70 degrees in here. And I got in, and I pointed it at home, and I turned on pilot assist and let it do its thing all the way down, sort of stop and go, and then onto the highway. And so it was doing the lane keeping stuff, kind of. I have to keep a hand on the wheel, but other than that, once you sort of let go a little bit, it works really well. And so I think that they've nailed that kind of stuff down. I think pilot assist could use a little bit more sort of. I don't want to. I'm not a little more delicacy in the steering. It gets kind of we're going to turn the wheel, and then we're going to turn the wheel, and then we're going to turn the wheel. It's kind of notchy, but I think they're all like that.
It has gotten a lot better. It's certainly, the control may not be as smooth and refined as you'd like, but in terms of its ability, excuse me, to actually see and track the lane and stay centered in the lane, even when you're going 70 miles an hour on the highway, on through those curves, where previously especially the 90 series, and to a lesser degree the XC60. I haven't driven the S or V60 yet, but the XC60 would tend to drift outwards as you were going through those curves if you weren't putting much steering input in. The XC40 really has an ability to just keep tracking the curves and stay where you expect it to be.
Yeah, it's a little uncanny. It took me a little bit to get used to that, because it doesn't hit other cars, obviously, but it gets a little closer to one side than the other than I'd prefer sometimes. And it's just, it's got it. It has it under control. But, it's like when you're riding with somebody else driving. And it takes a little bit of sort of readjusting yourself to that. But as, I was basically on a phone call for the whole ride back. And so I didn't pay as much attention. I was purposely distracting myself.
Bad boy.
No, I was doing it on purpose to see how it would do.
It still doesn't make it any better.
I mean,
You're
I was
still
paying
not supposed
attention.
to do that.
Anyway, I wasn't reading my phone. But it does really well. And I think that they have made a winner of a product there. I really, really, really like the XC40. I love that you can get it with color, like two-tone on the outside and bright red seats.
That is a trend I do like in a lot of the newer vehicles, is bringing back some deliberate two-tone stuff, unlike a certain manufacturer that will remain unnamed. Having like contrasting roof colors. I mean, this is something that kind of started with Mini. When they revived Mini, in the early part of this century, they always offered, contrasting or different roof colors relative to the body. But, the way Volvo and Nissan and several other manufacturers are doing it now, I think it adds more character to the cars. It
does. And it's like that kind of stuff, like everything old is new again. Well, all of that stuff that used to be done it's the same kind of thing. They would tweak the cars to keep them fresh. And you look at what FCA does with the Grand Cherokee. That thing doesn't go 2 or 3 years without some kind of tweak. And it's not necessarily a big tweak, but it gets adjustments, and that keeps it somewhat fresh and keeps people sort of looking at something that's a little bit new, and you can tell that it's new. And I also, with the ADAS stuff in the Volvo, I really like how they've erred on the side of caution, because that's safety is Volvo's thing. The system will back off when it notices other cars trying to merge, or if they're in a situation where you've got an exit ramp and you continue straight. It may be frustrating if you expect it to just barrel ahead, but it's nice that they've made it so that the car kind of goes, I'm just going to just slow down here. And if the person wants to take over, that's fine, but I'm going to go slow. And they've, so it doesn't wind up barreling into stuff that it shouldn't. That's nice to see. And then when you do want to go make a lane change, it's programmed to it'll accelerate as it changes lanes, instead of being confused and slow and making you a hazard. So it seems like Volvo really has a good philosophy about how they have put the ADAS into the cars. And the size of the XC40 is really nice. The back seat, I can sit behind myself easily. My kids are fine in it. It is on the smaller side. It has a decent amount of cargo room, and the T5 engine is 248 horsepower, so it's plenty powerful. All that stuff is pretty much dead on with the X1 that you were talking about, even including fuel economy. It's not exactly.
And speaking of cargo room and volume, I did pull up the Toyota specs for the RAV4.
Yeah.
And so it's similar in terms of passenger volume to the X1, a little bit bigger than the XC40 at 102 cubic feet without a moonroof, and just shy of 101 with the moonroof. Where it really differs, I think we both commented that, the RAV seems bigger than the other two. And it is actually substantially larger. It's just not that volume is not given to the passengers. It's got 38.4 cubic feet of cargo space behind the second row.
Oh yeah, it's like 10 cubic feet more than either of these.
Yeah, the BMW is 27 and the Volvo is 25. So it's got a lot more cargo space back there.
Yeah. And so as a family vehicle, the RAV probably makes more sense on a variety of levels. But if you're doing, or for if you need a second car or just something smaller or whatever, the Volvo makes some sense. You will find that you use up all of that cargo volume pretty quick. That's not a ton of space. But if it's the second car, again,
it's also a lot more cargo space than you get in a sedan.
Oh yeah, sedans in this size class are kind of useless. So I kind of like that crossovers are popular. At least they're useful.
Well, I'd rather just have the wagon.
Yeah, of course, but
or a hatchback.
We can't always have what we want, right?
Says who?
That's sure. You can get yourself a Toro X. I do still want to say as much as I got warm feelings about all of the systems, the modern driver assist in the Volvo. The Sensus still needs some work, even on faster hardware, which this seems to have. The disappointing thing is that there's the layout, the menu layout is confusing, and I understand that once you get it all set, you're not going to fiddle with it as much, and the voice commands do work, and I was using voice commands to place calls and switch audio sources and that kind of thing, so that's there, and that works really well. So you have to retrain yourself to some of that, which will happen as an owner, but what they're never going to get around is the fact that this version of Sensus, it's got too much on the screen, the touch targets are too small, and that is really hazardous when you're driving. And so you can say, yes, the ADAS stuff mitigates that, but you're introducing cognitive load and distraction just for simple stuff.
Things like especially the climate control.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a big
climate
screen.
Control should not be in the touch screen.
No, and if it is, make it the only thing that's in the touch screen. Like, make it big.
Or give it a dedicated space that never moves. So you're not jumping back and forth between different modes. Yeah,
so that criticism is not going to go away until they fundamentally change the way they do that. The UI is not good. The menu structure, it makes sense when you have it explained to you, but it's one of those things that you still just need to really spend time with. And even after you spend time with it, there's a lot of clicking that's not necessary. It's not a fine-tuned user interface. So yeah, you'll get used to it as an owner, but I don't think you should have to. But the rest of the car is great, and I would put up with that because it's not cheap either.
I agree with you. I mean, well, I think given the equipment level, what's included, because if you compare the the price with what you get in there, it's not cheap, but compare it to the BMW, you're getting a lot of those ADAS features and other things included at I think a lower price point than what when I had the XC40 a while back, it had a lot of that stuff in there at a lower price than the BMW X1. So I think in its segment, I think it's actually a pretty decent value.
I think it probably is. This one was a little bit impressively expensive at $46,000, but it has everything. It has navigation, which the BMW charges you extra for. It has a panoramic moonroof. It has, all the heated goodies for the cold weather package. There's nothing else to really want here. It has a Harman audio system, so it's got the upgrade there. The only thing it doesn't have that I thought it might, because it's in that price range, is the crystal shifter, but I don't think they even offer that in the XC40.
And I mean, who really needs that?
So good on Volvo for doing things the Volvo way. I don't like the Volvo way when it comes to shifters. It requires wasted motion. You got to bump it to, it puts it in neutral, and then you got to put it in the gear. I don't like that.
Yeah, that I think, when I first experienced that on the XC90 plug-in hybrid, I didn't like it there, and I still don't like that approach. There should be, maybe a separate button or, some separate position that is just dedicated to neutral. Now, when you go from the central position, you tap it for either forward or back one time, it goes into neutral, and then you have to tap it again in the same direction if you want to go to drive or reverse.
Right. And I think the rationale is that again is done that way for safety. So you don't inadvertently select the wrong gear with a bump. The safest thing is going to do is go neutral.
I don't buy that.
I can understand the point. I don't like it functionally.
Well, you know what? I have to disagree because I don't think it actually is safer, because if you forget and only tap it one time, now you're in reverse, and if you take your foot off the brake pedal, the car could start rolling away. Which is what happened to me in the XC90. the first time I did it. And, I mean, that's exactly the sort of thing that killed actor Anton Yelchin a couple of years ago when his Jeep Grand Cherokee, it had a similar kind of thing, and he inadvertently put it into neutral instead of park, and he got out to get check his mailbox, and the car rolled over him and killed him.
Yeah, I mean, I wish that there were standardized controls for all of the things. I think that would solve a lot of confusion. And until then, we're going to have companies trying to do it because they want to leave their unique mark on things, or they, philosophically think it's safer, or the research says it's safer, or whatever. So I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of it is, trying to create a distinct user experience that separates your brand from other brands. And, while I was at CES this week, I had dinner with some folks from a company based in Seattle and some other analysts, and we had a long discussion about brand different brand branding, whether companies, whether automaker, why automakers want to have a distinctive look or distinctive branding for a lot of this interior experience stuff. And I think part of, the thing that I brought up is that, for us, reviewing vehicles, it becomes more and more of a challenge to review vehicles because in so many functional ways, almost all new vehicles have actually gotten so good. I mean, they tend to be pretty reliable. They, everything generally tends to work. And, as a result, they become, as they become better and better, they become more and more alike. And, they start to become almost commodities. Yeah. And so how do you distinguish, and especially, as you start to electrify, it's harder, with an electric powertrain or a hybrid powertrain to make your car feel fundamentally different from your competitor's car. And so how does BMW make their car feel different to the customer and create a different user experience for the customer than for Volvo or Audi or BMW or, Ford or General Motors, Chevrolet for that matter, and this is one of the kind of the few remaining areas where they feel like they can make a difference. And unfortunately, I think in some cases it's being different just for the sake of being different as opposed to necessarily being better. Yeah. And that's something that will screw you in the end. When we design stuff like landing pages at the day job, our goal is not to look pretty. It is to convert. And so you kind of have to have that rationale when you're designing any user interface, which an automotive interior, especially for a driver, that's a user interface. So you have to try to remove friction. That's what we talk about, is let's remove the friction from the person doing the thing we want them to do. And so in a car, you've got to remove friction from the person being able to do the thing they want to do, because that's such a critical environment. You've got 4,000 pounds of metal. You could be hurtling down the freeway at 70 miles an hour. You don't want it to be hard for them to do the thing they want or need to be able to do. I can't tell you the amount of times where I've been stopped in traffic on the highway because, you get rush hour gridlock, and it's so nerve-wracking when you're the last car in line. You've just slowed down and you're looking in your mirror and you're like, I hope those people behind me see me. And you see somebody closing fast and you start looking around for the hazard flasher button, and it's not in the same place on every car. And so you should get
well, yeah, I mean, that in some respects, that's almost a problem that is, distinct to people like you and I and a lot of our colleagues, in the media side, who are jumping in and out of different cars every week. Most people, drive the same car for a year, 2, 3, 10 years at a time. And so, you do become accustomed to things like, where the controls are. And, so you're not going to be looking for the hazard flasher or, or other controls, after the first week or two.
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, that's fair.
Yeah. We do have kind of a first world problem there.
We do. All right. Well, You talked about being out at CES.
But before we get to that,
Okay.
Let's talk about another crossover.
Oh, alrighty.
Let's talk about the Explorer.
That's not really, I guess you could call it a crossover. That's a family truckster.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Ford calls it an SUV. It's a unibody. It's another utility vehicle. It's in this broad spectrum of utility vehicles, as they're often called now.
I think really it's the future of Ford. It needs to do well, or Ford's going to have a problem. And I think it's really well positioned to do well. You saw this earlier before it had been released, and remember talking about it in vague terms, but you were really positive about it. It looks good. It's on a new platform that's rear-wheel drive. It looks. They have that great picture from the press release where they've got all generations next to each other. So this looks like the biggest and widest Explorer, but they've done a lot of. It's
actually not. It's actually not really. I mean, the overall dimensions are almost exactly the same as the outgoing, the 2019 Explorer.
I hope the interior dimensions are bigger.
Yeah. The packaging is definitely a lot better. So, I mean, you look at it, compared to the current generation Explorer, it's clearly an Explorer. It's got the certain cues that have been there, from day one in 1990 of the Explorer, the blacked out B pillar and D pillar. And then, in the most recent generation, they also, blacked out the A pillar. So you just have, the C pillars being body color, holding up the roof, and then everything else, just looks like the glass wrapping around. And it's a good look, and I think, where it's evolved on this new generation, the wheelbase is a few inches longer. The lines, you look, especially from the side, you look at those character lines, that are still there from the previous generation, but now it looks more sharply creased. They kind of sweep upwards a little bit in the body. And when you look at the roof line, it's slightly less horizontal, towards the back. It kind of sweeps down just a little bit, to give you almost a hint of a boat tail, gives it a little more hint of motion, little sleeker looking, but the overall length is like 8 millimeters longer, I think, or something like that.
It looks noticeably wider in the picture, and that may just be lens distortion because there's at the edge of the picture.
I think it's an optical illusion. And I think, the way that they've done the new grille, the hexagonal grille and the slimmer headlights, it creates the impression that it's wider than it is, but it's not. It's spot on the same way.
So clearly Ford didn't think, and I don't think they're wrong with this, Ford didn't think there was too much wrong with the design of their outgoing Explorer, because there's a lot of similarity there on the new one, but the proportions are a lot better on the new car.
Absolutely.
It looks a lot better. It looks more premium, which I think is what they were going for. It has a certain presence at the curb, which is nice. And they've it's an important car for them. They've given it a new engine. There's a 3-liter EcoBoost that I think is available for the first. That's not in the Lincoln, is it? That's only available in the Explorer.
Up until now, that 3-liter twin turbo has been a Lincoln exclusive. So they initially did the 3-liter when they did the refresh of the MKZ a couple years ago. It's in the Continental, and it's also in the Aviator now.
Okay.
So it's, it has been a Lincoln exclusive up until now. This is the first Ford application of the 3-liter. It's the Nano V6, which started off as the 2.7, and now is the 3-liter version. And that's going to be in the Platinum, as well as actually, I can't talk about the other one yet.
Well, so the lineup now, they've got like the base model, the XLT, the limited hybrid. That's an important one. The ST, which is also important to folks like us, and then the Platinum. So like that's quite a range. That's a lot of different vehicles. And what this makes me initially think is there are a lot of reasons why we didn't buy an Explorer when we were buying, and this erases a lot of those reasons. It's on a rear-wheel drive platform now. So to me, I like the dynamics of those platform is better. It's more space efficient, which was a big problem for me in the last Explorer. I just, I was looking around like, there's a lot of metal here. Why send no space? And they did the best they could with what they had, and so I'm not knocking it, but it's just, I think that this is a very important update. It's been long in coming, and
the current Explorer's been out there for 8 years now.
Yeah, and the base model, what is it? It comes with the 2.3 liter EcoBoost.
So basically the same engine as the base engine in the Mustang.
So that should be relatively efficient in something this large. I know that they've done some work to bring some weight off of it.
Yeah, it's about 200 pounds lighter now.
And it's got the latest Ford tech, so that should be decent. Ford's been at it about half as long as BMW with the Sync and Sync 3, which was my Ford Touch, and that's getting more and more refined. So hopefully it's better. I still don't like the placement of the screen in the interior.
You don't like the dash top placement?
Hate it.
Why?
Because it breaks up the lines. That's especially in the pictures they use from
I guess from an aesthetic standpoint, I can see that.
So the pictures they used of the interior for the press reveal, the press release, are all the platinum interior, and that's just, it looks so great in pictures. And you've got all these horizontal elements because they have the space to work with, and those themes work really nice. And then you've got like, somebody left their iPad here. It's just like sitting there. The platinum is the only one that gets that 10-inch portrait layout display. All the others get an 8-inch landscape display. Okay, that's probably better.
I think it is better. But from a functional standpoint, I do like the approach of having the screen, sitting up on top of the dash, because it is closer to your line of sight. So you're not looking away from the road so much, to get a quick glance at what's there, for navigation or anything else.
All right, I won't complain with that. I will complain. It looks like the icons and stuff, the touch targets, like we were just talking about with Sync, are too small. But it looks like smartly they've pulled the HVAC and stuff out to physical buttons, and it's got a. Does it have a push button shifter, or what's the Ford?
It's got a rotary shifter.
Okay.
So same as what's in the latest Fusion. And several other vehicles now. So
I've really
basic rotary shifter.
I really do think that Ford has sort of looked at what makes the most popular crossovers / SUVs popular, and taken that to heart and changed the Explorer to really be a competitor. To redefine, to try to be a benchmark in the class. It's like, I feel like this is a sort of a play to really take leadership of the class and sell a lot of them. So, and I kind of hope they do. I'm excited to drive it.
Yeah, I mean, to date, since the original Explorer debuted in 1990 or 91, whatever it was, they claim it's been the best-selling SUV of all time, like 7.7 million units, and they expect those strong sales to continue with this new one when it goes on sale this summer. I think that there's a lot to like about this one. It's on that, like you say, it's on that same platform, that same unibody rear drive platform as the Aviator that debuted at the LA Auto Show. But with its own distinct Ford design and interior and everything, getting a look at it last week, it's definitely got more interior room. It's got better visibility out of it. The pillars are definitely slimmer than those thick columns that were in the current generation Explorer, which could be kind of hard to see around, especially the A pillars. And now in addition to the 2.3 liter base engine, there's going to be a hybrid version. As with all of their new platforms, Ford and most manufacturers are doing what we call package protecting for electrification. So they're designing in spaces to package batteries in there. So in this one, unlike previous generation Ford hybrid vehicles, the battery doesn't take up any space in the cargo compartment because, it's not in there. It sits under the right hand second row passenger seat, and we won't be able to talk about specs for that yet until next week. They're going to reveal more of those details on Monday at the Detroit Auto Show. But it should do. I think it should do really well. And the base price is only going up by like $400, and they're adding a lot of features to this. They're going to have things like their Copilot 360 package as standard equipment. So you get, cross traffic alert and blind spot monitoring is standard. The lane keeping and automatic emergency braking is standard. Unfortunately, they opted not to. So the lane keeping and automatic emergency braking uses the forward facing camera. And unlike, some vehicles that are out there now, that are also including adaptive cruise control as standard equipment, like, for example, the Toyota Camry and Honda Accord and the 2019 Civic and many other cars that, are considerably more affordable. Ford is still charging an extra premium for if you want the radar and the adaptive cruise control and, the additional functionality that comes with that. But aside from that, it's got a lot of good stuff on it, and I think it'll probably do pretty well. I
agree. It's interesting to see how they're positioning it as well. They're using careful words like recrafted, to talk about the cabin. And it's a subtle thing, but you picking up on that, and they want it to sound like it was, fussed over by artisans. I think that's sort of the impression I'm getting from how they're trying to set it up here is like, we think this car is very important, and we know that it's important to you. And so we our best, our best people were on it, and it makes me laugh a little bit, but I don't know that that's wrong. I think that it's such a competitive market. I when it comes time to replace the Grand Cherokee, which now has 100,000 miles on it, so it's getting old. I will be very curious about the new Explorer, because there were very few vehicles that sort of fit all my criteria, and the two that really fit them were the Durango and the Grand Cherokee, and they're not perfect. They're not without their issues. And so it's great to have another option, especially in this price class, because my assumption is that the Explorer is going to be very competitively priced in all trim levels.
Yeah, I think so. I would expect so.
So, yeah, it's a good time.
All right. Let's see. What do we got next? So let's jump into CES then.
Yeah. Which was the fact that there's car makers at CES still boggles my mind, although they've been there for quite a while.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. The first time, when I first joined Autoblog, my first Detroit Auto Show as covering the show as media was in 2007, January 2007, and that was really the kind of the coming out for automakers at CES. Ford's Mark Fields took the stage during a Microsoft keynote. So Ford didn't, that year Ford didn't actually have their own keynote, but Fields was on stage with Bill Gates during the Microsoft keynote to announce Sync. Yeah. So that was the original announcement of Sync. And then the following year, which was the first time I went to CES, was at that was when GM had their first big presence there, and that was when they did the demos of the autonomous Chevy Tahoe that won the DARPA Urban Challenge, and Rick Wagner did a keynote that year, and talked about all kinds of stuff.
Where did he go, by the way?
Rick Wagner.
Yeah.
I think he's on a couple of corporate boards now. I mean, he was fired from GM during the bankruptcy in 2009. Yeah,
I remember that, but I haven't heard from him since. And he was a sharp guy.
He's been fairly quiet since then.
Oh, well, counting his money.
Yeah. So anyway, he and then ever since then there was an increasing presence of automakers there for quite a long time. Although in the last couple of years, some automakers have kind of had a somewhat reduced presence. Like for the last 2 years, GM has not had a booth. They have not had an official presence at CES at all. The last time they did was in 2016 when they first kind of showed the production version of the Chevy Bolt and did some demo rides in the parking lot there. And then since then, they have not been back. And, others have had, kind of a more scaled down presence. They still have booths, but, they don't always have press conferences. Like FCA was there, no press conference there, but they had a booth, and Ford and others. So this, what it's shifted into the last couple of years has been a lot more presence of suppliers there. Big suppliers like Bosch and Denso and Aptiv and many others. And, they're showing off a lot of the technologies that are enablers for automated driving. A lot of companies showing off their LiDAR and their software and their chips. And a lot of the meetings I had while I was there this week was with various chip vendors like NVIDIA and Intel and NXP and Qualcomm, and everybody wants a piece of the pie, for selling the processors that are going to be needed for automated driving. And they're, what they're also increasingly doing is bundling in stacks of software, to help the companies that want to use their chips, get started, get up and running more quickly, especially NVIDIA. They announced their Drive Autopilot package, which they labeled as, the first complete turnkey, level 2+ automated driving solution. And I think turnkey is a little bit overstating the case. They include a lot of the AI software that you need for perception and also some of the stuff for the interior for digital cockpit and driver monitoring and that. But you still have to add a whole lot of software on top of that, as well as actually take the NVIDIA Xavier chip and put it onto a board and, package it, to put it into a car. And that's what Continental and ZF both announced this week was, their turnkey level 2+ packages that they're offering to automakers starting next year, that use all the NVIDIA hardware and software. So, that's a big part of what CES is now from an automotive perspective.
It's weird because it's a consumer electronics show. You wouldn't think that they would be there trying to sell their solutions like some kind of trade show. Yeah, I mean,
I was thinking about this yesterday on the plane flying home, and I think, if they were only looking at automotive, then yes, it would make more sense for them to be doing this stuff, showing this stuff at someplace like the SAE World Congress or any number of automated driving conferences that happen throughout the year now. But one of the things about what they're doing is, a lot of the chips that they're pushing for this stuff are things that are being repurposed from other applications as well. And, so there's a lot of commonality between what's happening here and a lot of the consumer electronics stuff, like especially with Qualcomm as an example. A few weeks ago, they announced their Snapdragon 855 chip, which is going to be the core of most of the flagship Android phones that come out in 2019. But they, at CES, they announced, their third generation automotive chip, which is a derivative of that, and is using a lot of the same internal components and, a lot of the software pieces for that stuff. And, they're also looking at, where can we target, some of these same, some of the same things we're doing for other non-automotive applications, especially like the LiDAR guys. For LiDAR, we're using it for automated driving, but there's also applications for LiDAR, especially for security stuff, in conjunction with cameras, having LiDAR scanning around an area, for surveillance, like Quanergy Systems, which is a LiDAR vendor. A lot of their business right now is actually, in security, and, they've been promoting, their involvement with, some of the surveillance along, some of the border fence along the southern border, to detect, when there's people approaching, a fence or a wall, or and any other kind of surveillance and security application. And the same thing goes for some, many of the other vendors as well, like Velodyne and others. So I think that's kind of the main reason why, they're going to CES, because they're showing it, the big, the thing they make the most noise about probably is the the autonomous driving stuff, but they're also looking at it, looking at how can we get more scale by using these same systems for other applications.
Yeah, I understand that. And maybe I think part of it too is like inducing demand to a degree too, like let people know what's possible and what's out there, and they'll start demanding it. They'll start asking manufacturers across all of this tech stuff to add these features. And so maybe it's like, hey, look what's out there, and you've seen these things that we can do. Now go tell your friends that make phones and stuff.
Yeah.
that you want it, and we're ready to supply.
Exactly.
It's just interesting. So what else did you see at CES?
Let's see. Nissan unveiled an updated version of the Leaf called the Leaf Plus, or in
a $30-something thousand 200-mile electric car.
Yeah. Imagine that. Oh, and you know what? You can actually buy one, or you will be able to in a couple of months. Yeah.
Oh, a couple of months. Yeah. They got to get through production hell.
Yeah.
So. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Like flipping a switch.
So let's talk about the Leaf Plus, though. What differentiates it from the Leaf?
Well, it's got some nice blue accents on the front and rear fascia, which is cool. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, visually, that's about the only thing that actually distinguishes it is these blue accents that they put on the front and rear. Most of the important stuff is stuff you're not actually going to see, which, the one other thing you will see is in the interior, the Leaf Plus gets a larger 8-inch screen, 8-inch display, which hopefully is a better quality display than the one in the current Leaf, which it's kind of not very good. But they didn't have it turned on the car we saw there, so I can't really judge. Plus, it wasn't outside during the daylight, which is where the current one really suffers. But the important stuff is under the hood and under the floor. So the Leaf that you can buy right now has a 40 kilowatt hour battery pack and a 150 mile driving range. And 150 horsepower, I guess actually like 147 horsepower electric motor. So for the Leaf Plus, or in other markets outside of North America, it's called the Leaf E Plus. It's for no particular reason.
Well, in America, that might be weird, right? The Leafy Plus kind of.
Yeah, it could be, I guess. Anyway, for the Plus, the battery has been bumped by 50% to more than 50% up to 62 kilowatt hours. Range goes from that 150 miles to 226 miles. And the motor has been increased from 111 kilowatts to 160 kilowatts. So it's about 210 horsepower now. So it's just slightly more than what you get out of a Bolt or the Hyundai Kona EV and the Niro EV. So it's right. It's going to be competitive right in the same ballpark as, this slew of other, $37,000, 200 mile plus EVs, which really Nissan, they needed to do this with the Leaf, to remain competitive. They also put a more powerful charger in it. So, it can now charge at 70 kilowatts on DC fast charging as opposed to the 50 that it previously did. So, it charges faster, but because you have a bigger battery, the overall charging time to go from empty to full on DC fast charging will still be about the same. But if you can find a 100 plus kilowatt hour or 100 plus kilowatt charging station, you'll get faster charging with the Leaf Plus.
Also, if you go for a Leaf, the thing I love about it is that it's been around now for 10 years. So
almost,
they've got it worked out.
Leafs are pretty reliable. They don't have any problems. They know how to build them, how to keep all the panels straight and have all the colors matching and everything.
We're such jerks.
Hey, you got to call it like you see it. We're agents of reality.
That's true.
As Mr. Roy likes to say. Speaking of which, I ran into him on Sunday too.
Was he on a scooter?
No, he was getting ready to go for a ride in one of Aptiv's automated driving BMWs.
With a human safety driver, of course.
Yeah. Of course. Is there any other way? Not right now, at least.
Yeah, but I mean, they're working on it. That was a big thing at CES. Let's see, other stuff that popped up there was like the Hyundai Elevate concept.
Yeah, so the Elevate is kind of an interesting idea. I mean, this is really just a pure design concept. Hyundai worked with a design firm in Detroit to create what they call an ultimate mobility vehicle. So one of the issues with, one of the things that everybody promotes about automated vehicles is the idea that it will enable mobility for people who can't drive. So whether that might be the physically disabled or the elderly or the young. But for some of those people, not being able to drive is just one part of the problem. There's also the problem of actually getting into the vehicle. And so, and then, of course, there's all kinds of other applications for vehicles where, going over rough terrain or, dangerous places where, you need something beyond the traditional vehicle. And so what Hyundai developed with this design firm, Sundberg Farrar, and it's funny, they had not given any indication before the show that they were going to unveil this concept. And it turned out that the guy sitting next to me on the flight out to Las Vegas on Sunday morning was David Byron, the design manager on this concept. And he was on stage during the Hyundai press conference on the following day. And he was telling me all about this thing and, showed me pictures of it, which was pretty cool.
Did you tell him that it looks like an AT-AT? The Star Wars kind of.
Yeah, no, I think he knew that. So the basic premise of this thing is that they wanted to take the central body and be able to allow it to go over pretty much anything. So in its base position, drop down, it rides on a conventional coil spring suspension and, drives like a regular vehicle, with electric motors in the wheels. And it's fully automated. It's kind of a pod like thing, and it's got doors on multiple sides. So, for example, you could open up the rear door and, roll a wheelchair or, something, rack full of cargo or whatever right into the back. Or, if you're using it as a search and rescue vehicle, take a gurney or a stretcher right in through the back. Or alternatively, when you need to go over something other than a basic road, it can lift up, all four, the body is suspended on four articulating legs, that the wheels are attached to the end of. And in the joints of these legs are this new kind of electric motor from a company that I'm not familiar with yet. I'm still looking into these guys. But whereas a traditional electric motor, you've got a rotor and stator that, are concentric with each other. And, the rotor rotates inside the stator. This is actually like two discs that are running parallel to each other. So think of it, if you know how a torque converter works, where you've got two halves of a torque converter and the hydraulic fluid and the transmission fluid in between them. And as one turns, the viscosity of the fluid pulls the other one along. Yeah. This works in a kind of a similar fashion. So you've got these two parallel discs, and it can switch the electric flux as on the one disc, in order to make the second disc go. And we've got traditional configured electric motors that do flux switching like this, but in this one, because of the way it's configured, you can have a lot more fields, where you can switch the flux, and they claim that you can get about 3 times as much torque out of this thing from the same size and weight motor as from a traditional motor design, and it's more efficient.
I bet if you're careful, you could even play back your cassette tapes with it.
Possibly, yeah.
Well, that's what it sounds like to me. It sounds like a tape head. It's the where the gaps are in the windings seem like they're on the face of the disc.
Yeah, except that there's no physical contact there.
So as you pass it over, the fluxivity of one, it uses reluctance in the other to, Anyway, I'm no EE, so I'm out of words.
When they first started on this project, they were actually using an electrohydraulic system to articulate this thing, And once they found these motors, they switched to using these motors. So they actually have little versions of these motors in each of the joints of the legs. So what it does is it allows this thing to raise up in the air. So you have the pod up in the air on these legs. And then this thing can either roll along on that, with massive articulation, so it can roll over, and they showed a simulation of it going over the Rubicon Trail, like a Jeep, with these legs just articulating all over the place as it rolls along. Or you can also have it walk in either, a lizard-like motion or a mammalian motion with the legs, depending on the kind of terrain you're going over, and it can climb stairs. And so that, one of the images that they had, showed it, actually climbing up, with the back end, walking up the stairs, of a brownstone, so that, somebody could roll right out the door, right into the vehicle, and then it smoothly walks back down the stairs. So it's a fascinating idea. I mean, it's going to be a long while before we ever see anything like this on the road, but they have some functioning scale models of this thing that they were showing off, and it'll be cool to see more of this and see how this progresses over the coming years.
I think that's what we need ideas that will become solutions. There's a vast array of sort of opportunities and problems and solutions to solve those things. And, the vehicle types are one issue, and that engineering and design and thinking can't stop. It needs to continue. And we also need to think of, okay, now we've got the vehicles, where do they fit? How do they work best? Because we talk about, the problem with the TNCs and the cars are deadheading all the time, and that's not efficient. It's making traffic worse. So you need different cars to fit different needs. And so it's cool to see that thinking is happening.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, this whole Hyundai project was managed out of their Silicon Valley lab, which they call the Cradle, which is actually an acronym for something that I can't remember off the top of my head. But, the Cradle, is kind of their research lab in Silicon Valley, but it also is the home of their venture capital arm, where they invest in a lot of interesting startup companies. So I'll be curious to see how this progresses over the next few years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I really want to know more about those motors. Those sound really, really interesting.
Yeah, that's definitely something I'm going to find out more about.
Cool. Well, I think that's everything that we had on our list. Other than
so we had a couple of questions.
Campaign.
We could talk about that next time.
It's a thing. You should look it up.
Let's hit a couple of questions, and then, because we're already running over an hour.
You're tired of hearing me. I get it.
Okay. So we had a couple of questions. First one from some guy named Chris Hawkert. I don't know. I can't remember where I know that guy from. I've name's familiar. But anyway, he asked, does GM's just announced plan to make Cadillac the nexus of their EV efforts a good idea, or should they be doing something else? Example, pushing electrification more across the board. So for those that haven't heard, GM put out an update for Wall Street folks, just updated guidance, saying that they're on track to hit their targets for 2018 and 2019, and as part of that announcement, they also said that going forward, Cadillac is going to be the focus of their electrification efforts, which I think to some degree makes some sense. I think it's not going to be exclusive. It's not going to be the exclusive home of electric vehicles at GM. It can't be, because they need more volume than what they're going to get out of Cadillac. But in terms of launching new stuff, and debuting platforms and technology, I think it makes sense to go with Cadillac, much as, Volkswagen Group is doing with Audi, and, because if you can sell, some premium electric vehicles, especially now, because in December, GM hit the 200,000 sales threshold for plug-in vehicles, which means that starting in April, they're, like Tesla, they've hit the phase out period for federal tax incentives. So starting in April, the maximum tax incentive drops from $7,500 to $3,750. And so we're probably going to see, around that time, a price drop on the Bolt to compensate for that. I mean, they're going to need to in order to stay competitive with all the other new entries in the marketplace, like the Leaf Plus and the Kona EV. But, at the same time, the company needs to make money. So they've got a better chance of selling EVs profitably from Cadillac than they do from Chevrolet. And this Sunday night, in the opening of the Detroit Auto Show, Cadillac's going to have an event in Detroit where they're going to be showing the new XT6 3-row crossover. But I've heard from one source at least that they're expected to also show another new vehicle, which may turn out to be the first battery electric Cadillac, and it'd be the first of this wave of 20 zero emission vehicles that Cadillac promised about a year and a half ago, coming by 2023.
Well, it kind of that's sort of what they need to do with Cadillac. It needs to be positioned that way, I think. And it. Yeah,
and I mean the brand frankly has struggled, and so they need to have they need to do something different.
As much as we love all of the performance Cadillacs, the V Series is a niche car, and they need to attract people who are looking for something different in their niche car. Larger niche, more like a notch, right? They want the EV buyer, and I think that's where they should take it. And your point about, I think, selling it with the luxury brand makes it more profitable, or like closer to profitability. That makes sense. I mean, it's why we've seen EVs start at the top and become more affordable as they become more adopted. The people who can afford them are the ones that can take the risk, and so that's why they start off as a premium product. So, and I think that's the pattern that should go on at GM as well. Get the stuff up and running, and then get propagated out to the different brands after Cadillac has it. And it gives Cadillac something unique to sell too for that period of time, which they badly need. Although apparently they're having a good year, especially in China.
Yeah, certainly in China they're doing better than they are here, and the same goes for Lincoln. Lincoln's having some good success in China as well.
Although China's car market is apparently off too. So
yeah,
wow, there's going to be some interesting global auto stuff as 2019 rolls on, given economy and trade.
Yeah, it's going to be a challenging year, no doubt about that. All right. Then the other question we had from Cody Lusnia was, what's your take on the newest Jeep Wrangler nearly failing, getting a 1-star rating on the Euro NCAP test?
Yeah, it's not good. Not good. But I mean, don't you expect the Wrangler to be kind of a meat grinder if you hit anything with it?
Yeah, pretty much. I think that from looking at the report, while the actual results, on the crash test dummies, was not terrible, across the board. One of the things they noted in there was that especially I think in the small offset rigid barrier test, the bar that goes across the bulkhead behind the dashboard separated from the A-pillar. And so, they said that, while at the speeds that the tests were done, it did okay, not great, but okay. If, in anything more severe or in different kinds of crashes, it might actually fall far short of what a lot of other vehicles can do. So it was very marginal, and thus and plus also it doesn't have some of the, it doesn't offer automatic emergency braking, and so they gave it a 1-star rating.
Yeah, and I can understand giving it a ding for not having the automatic braking. I mean, I understand also that maybe that's there for to keep the price down, or some argument because of the off-road nature of the Wrangler. I can't really imagine what that argument would be off the top of my head, but
the reality is, everybody knows that, this is one of the criteria that they're including in evaluations now of new vehicles. And, everybody is moving towards, offering, having automatic emergency braking as standard equipment.
The Wrangler's used as a car for the most part. Like, yes, it's very, very capable, but figure out a way to do it even with, like, I don't know, put a camera-based system in there or something.
Well, and that's what most of the systems are. They're camera based, and perhaps, one of the things in the Wrangler, because of the nature of what it's capable of off road, maybe one of the things you need to do is, have, an on off switch, or a disable switch, because when you're, going off roading, the automatic emergency braking, I could see how that could potentially be problematic.
I can tell you in traffic, when you try to make a tight lane change at high speed and those systems just nail the brakes in the middle of your lane change, like, holy shit, I'm going to spin out. What are you doing to me, car? I can only imagine off-road would be worse.
Yeah. So, maybe, when it's, at certain modes, certain, like maybe 4-wheel drive low or something, it disables it, so that it, when you're crawling around over the boulders or, through a ravine, you don't get that automatic braking.
But you know what? Also, like, most of the hardware is there, right?
I mean, and, the fact is that the cost of that system, the Wrangler is not a cheap vehicle, and the cost of that hardware is not huge. I mean, we're talking under $100
I'm just thinking now, like, it's got hill descent control now. So yeah, all that stuff is there.
But that's well, no, because hill descent control is using wheel speeds and accelerometers and
right, but
sensors.
it can deploy the brake hardware.
Oh yeah, it can. Yeah, it can certainly. Yeah, it's been able to do that for a long time. It's had hill descent control and traction control, so that's not an issue. It's just deciding based on the camera sensor when you're about to hit something and hitting the brakes automatically.
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised that this newest Wrangler did that poorly on the Euro NCAP, and I expect that it's not going to do a whole lot better on the North American version either. Our tests they're pretty well aligned now. It used to be that the Euro tests were harder, but I don't really think that's the case. I think it's pretty well harmonized now. Yeah,
they've gotten a lot closer between the official NCAP tests that NHTSA does and the IIHS tests. Because NHTSA doesn't do the small impact rigid barrier, for example, which is part of Euro NCAP, but IIHS does that, as part of their top safety pick evaluations. And so, manufacturers, increasingly are trying to hit both of those targets.
Yeah. Apparently the Jimny did better. So it's like, in terms of like similar vehicles, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like, they're both pretty new. They're both.
And that's not a good sign.
No. And especially because the Jimny is smaller, so it has less room to manage all that energy. But don't hit stuff with your Wrangler. That's been a rule for a long time.
Absolutely. All right. So you got an interview, right?
I did. I spoke with Jonathan Klinger from Haggerty, because it turns out that millennials and Generation Xers are now sort of the driving force in collector cars and classic cars. We've hit critical mass. We're getting old enough that we want those cars.
We may have a little bit of disposable income.
But what it means is the cars that you're seeing, he was calling it the Radwood effect, which I think is a really good way to sort of encapsulate it. The cars that we like are different than the old standards, 57 Chevys and I don't know, the Mustangs, Camaros. Like, those cars they're always cool. They continue to remain popular, but there's a lot of new and sort of weird stuff that is coming up. And, personally, from a personal level, it's partially driven by the fact that none of us can afford the old stuff like that anyway. All the boomers have them and they want ungodly sums of money. And honestly, I don't don't want to be my dad. I want stuff that I thought was cool. So we're driving the prices of things from the 90s. We talked a little bit about the Supra Turbo that went for $120,000 or something ridiculous. So it was a fun interview, and Hagerty.
And I like Jonathan. He's a good guy too. He runs communications for Hagerty, and Hagerty's an interesting company. Yeah. They specialize in doing insurance for classic cars.
Yeah, and I was just going to say they're more than that. Actually, they're kind of like an enthusiast outpost. You don't have to have a car insured with them to go, and they're producing content and stuff. It's an interesting company, and they're run by people like us. And I don't normally expect that I'm going to talk to my insurance guys about how much I love cars. So,
yeah. Well, and as you said, they're producing a lot of content. The Hagerty magazine is an excellent magazine if you like classic cars. And they, over the last couple of years, they have put together an amazing staff there, led by Larry Webster, who used to be at Road and Track and Car and Driver before that, and Popular Mechanics. And they've got people like Joe Damasio, Mike Austin, Aaron. I can't think of his last name now. Used to be at Motor Trend.
I don't know. Motor Trend, the one with the track that runs downhill.
Yeah. Anyway, they've got some amazing content that they're doing there. So if you're interested in classic cars, definitely recommend reading the Hagerty magazine. And a lot of those articles are online too.
Was this is an example. I think it was Mike Austin who wrote it. Hagerty. Isn't that where they published the story about they found the Bullitt Mustang? Yeah.
Yes.
And that was a really, really well done piece. So yeah, if you like that kind of stuff, seek it out.
Yeah, and one other cool thing about Hagerty, one of the things they do, they're based up in Traverse City in northern Michigan, and one of the something that's unique about them, insuring classic cars is always something that's kind of fraught because you never really know what the true value is, and so what they do is they offer plans where essentially you agree on the value of the car. Yeah. With them, and they set a price, and if you like that, that's good. And then if something happens to the car, there's no arguments. If you want to take the payout, they pay it out, and they take they can take ownership of the vehicle if they pay out on something that's totaled. And what they will do is, in some cases, depending on, the condition of the vehicle, they will take it and, bring it back to Traverse City and do a restoration on it. And, they work with people that are learning how to do this stuff, and they employ them, to do restorations on these vehicles, and so, I've seen some of the ones that they've done, there's this, a couple of years ago, we saw this 61 Plymouth Fury convertible that was totaled during Hurricane Sandy. It was an owner in New Jersey, and they took that and did a complete ground up restoration on the thing. Because the owner took the payout on it, so they took the car, and the thing is just immaculate. It's unbelievable. So it's a very interesting company the way they operate.
It was a great interview, and hopefully we can talk more with the folks from Hagerty, because they continue to make interesting stuff, good talking points. So I'll tack that in here, and then, that'll end the show.
Okay, and we'll talk to you next week.
I'm talking with Jonathan Klinger from Hagerty Insurance, or Hagerty Worldwide, I believe, right?
Mm-hmm, yes.
Okay, and so I know you folks as insurance, but there's more to it than that. So can you sort of tell us a little bit about what Hagerty does?
Yeah, absolutely. So, thanks so much for having me on, and excited to talk about this stuff. So Hagerty as a business, the simplest way of explaining it is we're an automotive brand, and everything we do is centered around collector cars or fun vehicles. A lot of people do know us from the specialty insurance side, but we also publish Hagerty Magazine and produce a valuation guide, the Hagerty Price Guide, which is, think of it as like similar to the Kelley Blue Book, but for the most commonly traded collector vehicles. And then actually most recently, we rebranded the membership side of our organization to be called the Hagerty Drivers Club. and that is that's something we're pretty excited about. And you don't have to have an insurance policy to be a part of that. And so that's members-only events around the country. That's more in-depth access to our valuation database, as well as the magazine that we send out.
Yeah, and actually, your magazine has one of the highest circulations of car magazines in the country.
Yeah, we're more than 600,000 at this point, and continuing to grow. So yeah, that's been funny. That started out a little more than a decade ago, literally as a quarterly newsletter. Kind of stapled down the middle and sent out to policyholders, and it's evolved well beyond that. And that's the biggest differentiator of the Hagerty Drivers Club. Before, in order to receive that, you did have to have a vehicle that was insured by Hagerty and then opt into what was then called Hagerty Plus. And a number of people kept coming to us that asking for it, and it just became very obvious that there's an awful lot of people out there in North America and the world, for that matter, that love cars, have an interest in cars. They don't necessarily own a vintage car at that time, at this point in their life, and they may again at some point. But why limit them to the fun of actually having to own a vehicle versus they can still participate?
Yeah, no, that was actually something I wanted to touch on, was the Hagerty Drivers Club, because that is new. And you get discounts on from other sort of partners with you, and
Coker Tire, Reliable Transport, California Car Cover, a handful of automotive brands like that. In most cases, it's 10% off. In some cases, a little bit more. But yeah, we've had some really great partners sign on with that, and so far that's been quite successful on both sides.
So that answers a lot of questions that folks who are interested in owning a classic or a collector car, which the definition of is sort of evolving, and that's why we're talking today.
Exactly.
But it answers a lot of those questions, because the idea of standard insurance for those is different, and then the valuation it gets sticky. Blue book value on something older is generally not going to pay you out what it's worth in that sense. So there's a reason to go with a more specialty insurance carrier.
Absolutely.
Just getting to be part of that community, I think, that's great. It sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And everything that if you interact with us, read about our stuff, everything we do is it's all around the love of driving, and that's. And of course, it's obviously the cars, and we talk about the love of the cars and cool cars, and life's too short to drive boring cars and all that fun stuff. But really, if you just sit and think about it, it's tied to people that enjoy driving, because that's when you get the most fun out of these cars, is when you actually drive them.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
So as your latest valuation tool update, I guess you noticed that for the first time ever, Generation X and millennial folks are going to outnumber baby boomers, who's sort of driven the collector car market, a classic and collector car market, and just what is and what isn't a classic, what's cool, what's not. It's been this long shadow of boomer culture, and that has changed.
Yeah. No, that's something we're pretty excited about, because for a long time there's just been this common myth out there that the car hobby was going to die with the baby boomer generation, because for quite a long time it has been largely driven by the baby boomer generation. It was a large generation. It's long past the time when they started, that as a generation started coming into an age of more disposable income. And of course that was, pre-recession, what drove a lot of the values as high as they did, particularly on American muscle cars, in addition to European sports and racing vehicles. And so there's just been a lot of attention given to the interest of the baby boomer generation when it comes to cars, and for good reason. And so then a lot of people would just jump to this conclusion, well, are future generations going to be as interested? And so in 2018, market activity of the millennial generation and Gen X generation combined eclipsed that of the baby boomers and older for the first time.
And so they're interested, clearly.
Yes.
But they're not interested in necessarily the same things.
Not necessarily, no, and that's the fun part when you start to dive down in it. So if you look at the top of the most popular vehicles by generation, vehicles that don't surprise you, the Ford Mustang, the Corvette, vehicles like that, they transcend all generations. There's an awful lot of Mustangs out there that have been produced, and any living driver has been impacted by the Mustang or the Corvette, or in some cases the Camaro at some point. And so just in terms of numbers, those still are the most popular across the generations. But when you start to get down below those top 4 or 5, that's where things start to get interesting and you start to notice differences. And the one that jumped out to me, the single biggest difference, comes from a British sports car versus an Asian sports car. And that being a baby boomer or older is many times more likely to have a British sports car, whereas the Gen X and millennials are significantly more likely to have an Asian sports car. If you're talking about that below $50,000 and in many cases below $30,000, just that entry level, nimble, fun to handle, easily to modify car. For the older generations, that was the British sports car. For the younger generations, it's an Asian sports car, and that is a significant difference.
Well, that's really interesting because I'm a 77 model, so I'm sort of right at the tail of Generation X, just like right at the beginning.
Exactly. Well, you're just a few years older than me. I'm an 81 model.
Oh, so. There you go. So what I find interesting and sort of like illustrative of that is, yes, there were British cars around when I was a kid. The TR6s and Spitfires and stuff like that, but they were getting increasingly rare. Like we're talking about when I started coming of age and really noticing cars in the late 80s and definitely in the early 90s, those things were not around. And they had a reputation to begin with. And and the ones you could find, you had to be very careful. You don't want to find a rust bucket and stuff because most of them were convertibles. Cheap speed for us was Toyotas and Hondas, and it was all of those inexpensive cars that didn't get any respect, and now clearly they're getting a lot of respect. We just saw a Supra sell for $120,000.
Yes, I know. We were watching that play-by-play yesterday. It's like wow, we have a six-figure Supra.
Yeah, and I have feelings about that, but I think that's just an awful lot of money for that car. But
I know it's bittersweet. We're the same way. It's like wow, it's great to see that those cars getting that respect, but it's now, to your point, they're no longer cheap speed, and they haven't been for a while. A Toyota Supra Turbo, but yeah, they're no longer cheap speed.
So is that sort of like one of the bigger trends you're seeing is the shift to Asian cars? What else are you seeing in terms of just tastes and I guess research that people are doing? Where does the interest lie?
The other biggest difference is what you would think of as a traditional car, and I'm using air quotes, versus a pickup or SUV. So the younger generations are many times more likely to be looking at a first-generation Bronco or early Blazers, pickups of all generation. You're referencing Bring a Trailer. These later model 90s and even early 2000s Toyota pickups that are selling for shockingly high money. Of course, they're in really good shape. So pickups and SUVs definitely differentiate the younger generations from the older ones. And if you think about it, it's fairly obvious. So people our age and younger compared to our parents' generation, we have just grown up in an SUV-dominated society.
Oh, sure.
Once you start into the late 80s. And so it just kind of, that certainly has to have some some impact of that. But then you also look at the logistics of it, though. An early SUV, for the most part, and certainly a lot of pickups, they're still very affordable. They're very simple to work on. Certainly the American-made brands, parts are very readily available. So to people who enjoy tinkering and getting their hands dirty, a SUV or a pickup, they're simple mechanically, they're an easy restoration project, especially for a first timer. And so there's a lot of reasons driving that. And you also are starting to see this generational shift from the original owners who purchased those vehicles is primarily for a form of utility. It was the work truck, or there was a real reason why they had a four-wheel drive vehicle, and now the people who are purchasing them, especially when you can find rust-free examples out west or down south, to them it's their fun, extra cool vehicle.
Yeah, well, and I think you hit the nail on the head with the ability to easily work on them, and that's where V8s went, and rear wheel drive and stuff throughout the 80s and 90s, when they were coming out of the sort of regular passenger car. There's that big shift. I mean, I'd love to see the valuations. I kind of wouldn't actually, now that I think about it, but stuff that's, because we like weird stuff. I'm a real Z24 Cavalier enthusiast. I think that's a fantastic car.
I drove one in high school, and I can't remember if it was a prom or homecoming date, but my girlfriend's mother had a red Z24 Cavalier with a 3.1 5-speed, and we took that to the dance, and I just thought that was the fastest car I'd ever driven.
Yeah, I mean, it'll peel the front tires right off the wheels.
Yeah, that's right into the ditch.
Yeah, I mean, yes, but it's those cars didn't get any respect, and now, just having lived with them, you find that you've got this like colloquial knowledge of these cars that are like, oh, what's a Citation X11? You're like, oh, let me tell you. These were cool. The Mercury LN7 and stuff like that. That just like they're very rare. So
yeah. So my I'll give you a little bit of insight into my level of nerdum for cars. So I turned 16 in '98. That's when I started driving, and I grew up in a fairly rural area in northern Illinois. A lot of my family farms, and so I was around a lot of pickups and all of that. And I didn't want a truck as my first vehicle. I wanted something a little more fun to drive, and I really wanted a Mustang, 5.0 Mustang, 87 to about 93. Mustang
Everybody
GT,
did.
Or LX, but I couldn't afford one with the V8, so the only ones in my option were the 4-cylinder examples, and I just couldn't quite wrap my head around that. And so what I ended up with was a 91 Mercury Cougar that had the optional 5.0 in it. And so in my mind, I convinced it that was my poor man's Mustang, and drove it for not quite 2 years, and I was proud of it at the time, sold it and moved on. And about a year and a half ago, was not searching, but just stumbled across a Chrysler dealer in southern Michigan, their website. They had on trade a 91 Mercury Cougar with the 5.0 with 35,000 original miles on it. Someone bought it, loved it, never drove it in the wintertime. And as you can imagine, they're not worth anything. They were asking way too much. And over the course of about 8 months of me calling that salesman about every 6 weeks and reinforcing my offer of what it was worth, they finally sold it to me. And so I now have that, a low mileage example of what my first car was.
I mean, congratulations. It's
been kind of fun. It's also a good case study. If you need an example of how good cars have improved in the last 25 years, go take that car for a drive down the interstate. Because
really,
it's just, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not worn out with the low miles. Everything works flawlessly. It's as you would expect it to be. But it's just interesting. It's 75 or 80 miles an hour, which is interstate speeds these days if you're going to traffic. It just requires a little more driving. They're just not quite as tight. The suspension's not quite as refined, but in 25 years evolution, you expect things to get better. But it's just an interesting case study of the difference. But yeah, so now I'm gonna drive that to Radwood in Detroit.
Oh, good for you.
So yeah. So anyway, so we've gotten way off track.
Yeah, but that's okay. We can bring it back on track. I think we've sort of covered pretty easily. What are some up and coming classics to watch? I think we hit that with some of the the rare Fox bodies and the Asian cars and stuff. So another idea I was wondering about is, there was a significant shift earlier when the boomers really started to come into the classic car market. A lot of the pre-war stuff, it its value's dropped significantly. All of that knowledge is like the guys who are into that stuff are in their 70s, and well, boomers are in their 70s. Those guys are even older, and nobody knows what some of those things are anymore. So is that actually going to start to bite stuff like even Model A's and Model T's? You know what they are, but they're not. The enthusiast base isn't there anymore.
Yeah, well, so the Model A in particular is interesting. Is they actually have held steady because someone who is interested in a pre-war car experience, that is the entry point.
Yeah, that's true.
Because they're very. I own a Model A. I have a 1930 Model A two-door sedan, and I don't currently, but I have owned Model Ts in the past. And a Model A, you can. Well, I always like to say, and I love them both, but to the average person, a Model A, you can drive. A Model T, it's a hobby. You take everything you know about driving and throw it out the wheel and start over, and that's where the fun is, in my opinion. But so the Model A's, they're doing okay. But to your point, yes, when you saw that transition from the silent generation, pre-boomers, however you want to refer to them, to the baby boomers, significant pre-war cars, they've held well. They still do well. They're continuing to go up in value. But when you get away from your very common Fords and Chevys to just a four-door sedan of whatever it was, even a Dodge Brothers from the 20s four-door sedan, like those values at best over a 20-year time, they've just kind of held flat. And that's assuming the car's been maintained in good shape. You certainly, the money it would take to restore one of those vehicles, if it was in poor condition, you're going to be quite upside down in your overall investment in it.
Yeah.
But I would say there is a little bit of difference, because if you go back to that generation, to your earlier point, the source of knowledge was held with the people who grew up with those cars. And that transfer of knowledge really only happened at the car club level, because we're talking pre-internet time. So the big reason people joined car clubs were, the two big reasons was access to parts and technical information, and then of course the social aspect. But of course now you fast forward in the internet age, in many cases that has taken care of that, as far as both access to the information, technical specs, as well as where do you find the parts. And so we're not as worried about that transition from the boomers to the younger generations being as much of a loss of information. And by the way, also there have been enough cases of younger people who have emerged as specialists that truly know certain pre-war cars, and so it's not all been lost, but yes, it's. I don't think it's going to be as much of a shock going from the boomers to the younger generations. And by the way, the boomer generation is still a very large generation. They're still a very significant part of the collector car market. And so what this data isn't necessarily saying that the boomers are going away. It's what it does prove, though, is the fact that younger generations are interested in cars, and particularly the millennials, as they're getting to the point where they're able to purchase a vehicle besides their basic transportation needs, they are interested. And so to us, it's a good thing. It's a great thing for the car community.
Yeah, well, I think that's positive, like a positive development. It's encouraging to see that all of the doom and gloom about, hey, the kids just aren't interested in cars, or younger folks aren't interested in cars, and we're saying, no, they are, and especially when you start to buy a house and stuff. When you're doing all of the things that require a car, your tastes and your interest will sort of naturally turn. They're just going to turn to different things.
But there's also some other interesting differences. So usage is much different. Younger generations actually they drive their cars more than the older generations, and some of that is, if you think about it, if you're buying an early Miata, for example, that's a very drivable car. You can drive it anywhere. You can you're not a hindrance to traffic. It's not like you're breaking the old car out of the barn for just a dedicated weekend stroll. Their enthusiasm and their use of the cars are a little more intertwined in their daily lifestyle. If you think about just how busy we are as a society, in some cases, if a person lives in the area and the weather's nice and they're comfortable with where their vehicle's parked at when they're at the office, sometimes the drive into the office and the drive home, that's their most relaxing or their most relaxing part of the day, where they can be present with themselves, and why not do it in a fun car?
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, so those are the kind of the subtle differences that are adding up into bigger trends. The other big difference when it comes to usage is just, let's just call it the cars and caffeine era. These more casual usages of these vehicles that allow for social interaction. And so rather than taking your car to the car show, spending the week before detailing it, and then you go park it on the lawn and sit next to it all day, younger generations are much more interested in these casual Saturday morning gatherings. You meet up, you have a good time. It's a bunch of like-minded people. It doesn't matter what the car is, how valuable it is, how not valuable it is. And then by 10 a.m., you're on with the rest of your day, and it works out well.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned Radwood, too, which I've just been watching that sort of take fire, even over the last, I don't know, let's say the last year. It started off as one or two little things, and it's grown immensely.
Well, and there's a perfect example of event usage also drives interest and values in cars. And so all of a sudden, Radwood has done a brilliant job at creating this fun event that's appealing to a lot of people, but certainly to our age group and younger. And it's also highlighting vehicles that have not experienced the love by the car community. And so now all of a sudden, if someone has their grandparents' pristine wood-cladded town and country or LeBaron convertible from the 80s that probably couldn't have hardly given away, now there's an audience of people that wants that.
Yeah.
They want to show up with that absolute cream puff of a car that most people have forgotten about.
Well, it goes back to, I think, that memory of the car you had in high school, right? Like you had a Cougar, I had a Fox body Ford Granada wagon.
There you go.
Which is that's a super rare Fox body.
Yeah, and you're right.
I wrecked it, so I'm sorry, but
well,
but
that happens.
I would lose my mind if I saw one, especially if it was like the same color and stuff as the car I had in high school. And I took on my grandmother's last car, '99 Crown Vic, for the same reason that it would have sold for nothing. It had super low miles. I kind of needed a car anyway.
Good cars.
Yeah, it's just a bad car to drive anyway because it's so floaty. So I was interested to see your impression of the Fox out in modern traffic. It sounds like it's kind of the same thing. It's just
well, it's maybe I over exaggerated that. It's just a subtle difference in kind of in my world, my daily driver is I have a 2012 F-150, live in northern Michigan, four-wheel drive, and it's also my tow vehicle if I need it. And then I am in the minority in the sense that I do like pre-war cars, and so hence the Model A ownership. And my wish list of vehicles is a little more champagne than reality for right now. But I'd love to have a 30s Packard at some point in my life.
But who wouldn't?
So yeah, exactly. But so my world is either really early stuff or, like you and I were in the automotive industry, we get the opportunity to drive some pretty neat, modern, and the latest and greatest cars. And so that kind of 80s and 90s I really hadn't driven in a long time. And so when I started driving that car after I purchased it, it's like, oh, wow, okay. There has been some evolution since the 90s.
Yeah, and it's like that little rough around the edges, scruffiness. It's going to be an interesting, I think, development over the next 5-10 years to just watch it. So because you guys are in the insurance business too, I'm assuming that there's contact with restorations, part suppliers. You have to know where the good stuff is coming from. Are you going to see those companies sort of evolve or new players pop up to sort of take the mantle?
Yeah, you're going to see both. You're going to see both. The aftermarket has been really good in the last 2 decades, I would say, is responding to consumer needs, because there was quite a long time when if you needed a part for your car, it was, again, you had to be a part of the club, or you knew this person who knew a guy who maybe had this part in their barn. That's not so much the case anymore. Plus, you also have things, the modern technology like 3D printing and just, a lot more convenient and less expensive ways to remanufacture parts. About 5 years ago, one of the things we were talking about from a point of concern when it came to these 80s and 90s and newer vehicles was what was going to happen when it came to plastics, the wiring harnesses, and software programming. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is, so plastic is not a stable substance. At some point, it's going to become brittle or crack or fade or what have you, and it's all, in most cases, injection molded. So who's going to all of a sudden start reproducing these molded dashes for whatever,
right.
Long after the manufacturers stop supporting that. So who's going to tool up for that?
Yeah,
so those are the questions.
Molds are not cheap.
No, they are not cheap. Yeah, you have to see a need for many, many copies before someone's going to do that. Same with the wiring harnesses. If you think of how complicated wiring harnesses are on modern cars compared to vintage cars, like when I restored a Model T that I previously owned, I literally chalked out on the garage floor the four wheels where the headlights are, and I built a wiring harness for it. You're not going to do that on an early Lexus coupe, for example, if someone's getting to the point that, or an Acura Legend or something like that. But again, we're starting to see these little pockets. The Acura is a perfect example. There's this, I don't know if I want to call it subculture of the car world, but there are some just rabid early Acura fans out there that do serious drives. I don't know if you know the name Tyson Huey. He lives out in the Phoenix area and has a blog. He chronicled taking his Acura up past 500,000 miles and all of that, and now has amassed a collection of 90s Acuras. And he has just this whole following of people, and they do drives around the country in their Acuras. So getting back to then my earlier point on the software. So not so much the hardware. It's easy to reproduce hardware. There's individuals and companies that can easily make a sensor or fabricate a sensor that would work, but the programming on these modern, sophisticated cars that allows everything to work in sync, that to me is my question that still is unanswered. Will the manufacturers at some point unlock, after a certain point, the software programming to their cars so that, let's say 20, 30, 50 years from now, if you're restoring something or servicing something from now, who's going to have the programming that they spent millions developing?
That's a good question.
When the cars were new. And I don't have the answer to that. So hopefully someone from the aftermarket or whatever is listening and says, hey, we need to capture this information right about now.
What I've found amazing is before I decided to inherit the car, I had Volvos, and so I had rear-wheel drive Volvos for years, the turbos and the 740 turbos. Those had a particular flavor of Bosch Jetronic fuel injection. And if you needed to get a little fancier, if you wanted to modify or raise boost, you either had to add some pieces on or go to a standalone ECU. And in the last 15 years, enthusiasts have figured out how to take those Jetronic computers and use the basic system and reflash the proms in them to change the maps and stuff. This is stuff that wasn't happening when I was into those particular cars, and I'm amazed at the ability of that vintage system now. Something from the 80s. It'll support 400 horsepower, no problem, with the stock injection system with some changes.
Yeah. And so there's a perfect example of anytime you kind of have concerns. Really, in the past 20 years, the market has done a good job at answering those. Especially people who are well versed in computer programming and all of that. It amazes me what they can do.
Well, that's good. I think the future is bright then for the enthusiast market. So, I think we should probably let you get back to the the commerce of insurance and driving and all that. But Jonathan Klinger, I wanted to say thank you very much for being on Wheelbearings and talking about where the market's going. And if anybody's listening and you have a cool car and you want to insure it, you should talk to Haggerty.
Absolutely. Haggerty.com. It's real simple, and there's a whole bunch of other fun information beyond insurance.
Yeah, just go and have a good time. Enjoy your cars. Drive them.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. We'll have to do this again sometime.